Welcome to The Memory Game, a podcast where I, Nathan Tuffin,
and I, Rob Beer, exchange voice notes as we carry out the important work of recording an emotional history of video games
for the betterment of future generations.
This week, we go in search of lost time with a highbrow question about Marcel Proust from our listener Sam.
Do you have any sort of Proustian memories of video games? Like, is there a Proustian memory, just by way of explanation, is from a Marcel Proust book called In Search of Time, in which a character eats a madeleine, I think it's dipped in lime tea, and it triggers a whole load of childhood memories. Quite famously, that's what happens to the critic Anton Ego in Ratatouille when he eats the ratatouille. So it's any sensory experience, quite often taste or smell, which triggers a strong memory involuntarily in you. So just by way of explanation, and I'll try not to go too deep because it's not my podcast. I don't want to record one right now. So my first Proustian memory is based on those. It's triggered, and it still is triggered really strongly by these little boiled sweets, which you used to get normally around your nan's house. I think they still exist. These little boiled sweets, they're often round or oval, fruit flavoured with a little dimple in the middle. And specifically, it's the blackcurrant ones. So I think it was one Christmas, probably 1991, maybe 1992, where me and my brother got our Mega Drive for Christmas as a surprise, and my dad bought us two games, one of which was Super WrestleMania, and the other one which was Batman Returns. First one is every time I taste one of those boiled sweets, specifically the blackcurrant ones, I'm just taken straight back to playing Batman Returns on the Mega Drive, which was actually pretty hard, and playing on emulators I realised I was actually probably pretty good at it. So if it wasn't single player, maybe that would be one of my games with death. Just spent a long time playing it because there was nothing else to do. So those sweets take me straight back. It's exactly like Ratatouille. And then the second one, there's actually three things that trigger this memory. One is the smell of cat food, one is cheesy Doritos, and one is chocolate Pop-Tarts with milk. So my friend George had a Super NES with a multi-tap and extra controllers, which was pretty exciting back in the early mid-90s, and they always had good snacks at their house. Cheesy Doritos had just come out in about 1994. He had a multi-tap, so whenever I eat cheesy Doritos or chocolate Pop-Tarts with milk, I'm taken back to that time. Now, the cat food one is a bit weird. This is a smell. He also kept terrapins in his room, which he didn't clean out very often, and he would feed them cat food. And so the smell of sort of murky terrapin water mixed with cat food, or just the smell of cat food, still takes me back to playing Super Smash Tennis and Mario Kart back in the day on the SNES. And then there's a third one, which is ambrosia custard. So had a friend whose house was next to the bus stop after school, and he had a Super NES. I didn't have one. And one of the snacks they always had was ambrosia custard, and so we'd go to his house and eat a bowl of warm custard from the microwave. We didn't have a microwave, we weren't allowed ambrosia custard, and we didn't have a SNES, and play Super Star Wars and Super Mario World. So the smell and taste of that sort of weird plastic fake custard immediately transports me back to that first level on Super Star Wars, because we didn't really get beyond it, because we'd play the old levels and lives, with it being a single player game where you would play, one of you would play till you lost a life or completed a level and had to hand the controller over. So yeah, that was a bit longer than I expected, sorry. But hopefully it sort of illustrates what I think the question might be, and that was definitely very rambly.
Oh boy, what a question. I think I had responses to this before I had a question formulated, and so when it popped up in the inbox, I was entirely ready for it. And I've got to say, if I had the choice of being able to step into Sam's Proustian memories, I would definitely go for the hard-boiled sweets memories rather than the murky terrapin water filled with cat food. If a single moment was to stretch into infinity and you were able to stay in that, you wouldn't want that moment to be include that smell of murky terrapins. there were lots of different directions I thought I could go with this. And in the pre-season, my very first question to Nath was about his earliest memory of gaming. And a lot of the things that occurred to me crossed over into that territory. And yeah, Sam's answer included a reference to unboxing the sort of Sega and the joy of that day and that moment. And I had a similar experience with unboxing the Amiga 600, which came as part of a package called The Weird, The Wild and The Wicked, which we briefly considered as the name of this podcast. And that included a game called Pushover, which features an ant who is tasked by the dog from the Quavers adverts with going down a ant hole and recovering a packet of Quavers crisps. So there's definitely some important crossover between food and games for me. But I guess it's not just the food; it's the sensation and that entwining and unlocking a sort of capsule of a moment. And actually, one of the memories that I had, strongest memories and associations I had with that, was thinking about being at a family friend's house. So it was my mum's work colleague from the playgroup that she worked at, and playing Duck Hunt on the NES. So I don't think I played NES outside of this experience until I was, an adult and playing them in arcade emulator sort of experiences. So very, very strong and very vivid, because I think I must have been there multiple times and played multiple times, but I have memories of playing Duck Hunt, Zelda, Link to the Past, and Mario. And possibly Alex the Kid, actually. So that can't have all been one session. I must have had multiple memories. But the thing that unlocked it for me was thinking about the smell of cigarette smoke indoors. And that's obviously it's something that you bump into less these days. But I don't think, so my auntie and uncle smoked, but I think they always smoked in their kitchen and with the windows open, and I don't think they would have smoked around us when we were kids. But my mum's friend, just her and her husband just smoked indoors, didn't ask questions, just like that was it. And so there was just that lingering smell of cigarette smoke, like trapped in the carpets. And it's not something I have negative associations with, but it was just something that was very singular, I think, in my childhood. I can't think of many other people that I would have knew that sort of smoked indoors. And so, yeah, I have a sort of mingling of that experience of the grey NES controller and the grey smell of cigarette smoke. Another one that I had been thinking about, and I think had been in my mind because I'd been chatting to my cousin already, advertising the fact that I was doing this project and seeing if he was interested in listening. And I was like, I had a memory of playing a game at your house, and I vaguely described it, and he was like, Future Cop LAPD. And he said, him and my other cousin, they just talk about it. It like comes up in their conversations like all of the time. And so this was a memory that I had of playing that game. I think it was a demo disc that they had of it on the PlayStation 1 in their back room. And so it was like I think it was like sort of Transformers games. You could play as like a mech running around, and then that could transform into a LAPD cop car that also had guns on it. And that was absolutely the dream. There's so much in there that ticked the boxes of what I was interested in at the time. And I have a memory of my auntie bringing in, and again, this might not have been on the same time. Your memories get distorted, but in my sort of false memory of playing that game is my auntie bringing in a chocolate muffin. And so for some context, my house, we would have had like cupcakes, probably homemade cupcakes rather than sort of shop bought ones, but like pretty not vanilla, they would have been chocolate, but like pretty basic cupcakes, you know, like stock, nothing excessive. Like you wouldn't have got chocolate chips in there because it's like, well, there's chocolate powder in there, that'll do, type thing. And so having this, it must have been a shop bought chocolate muffin, so double chocolate, you know, like dark cocoa powder and then chocolate chips in there. And my auntie had warmed them up in the oven and done a little cross in the top, like you do in the top of a jacket potato, and put a lob of butter in there as well. And just the absolute indulgence of that. It felt like it helped to distill like some key difference between the way that food worked in those two houses. Just like an act of hospitality, I think, beyond anything. Just felt like it was the greatest thing that could have been brought in at that moment. It already quite a warm and comforting memory of being with family, and then topped up with a nice lob of warm butter on it. So yeah, LAPD cop. What's it called? LAPD cop, super cop. I said it right the first time, whatever it was, and chocolate muffins. Yes, please. My final example that I thought of was another friend that I had talked to about this podcast. So it might just be, these might not be Proustian memories, they might just be memories associated with people that you've just spoken to. But I think I would have come up with this one anyway, even if I hadn't just seen them, which is the mingling of playing N64 games, idiosyncratic N64 games, so the one not just GoldenEye, but ones that were slightly off the beaten path, and pita bread and taramasalata. I've heard this talked about elsewhere. I think it might have been on the Off Menu podcast. The idea of like remembering when foods came out, you know. So we think of that with music, but actually, like, do you remember when like Doritos were invented, or like Pringles, or there was a sort of time before and a time after? And this was true of pita bread and hummus. I'm sure those things go back centuries in their countries of origin, but it feels like they were in middle class circles at a certain point, and now they're like fairly ubiquitous, and you can get hummus anywhere. But I'm sure if you went into my co-op in 1997, you wouldn't have found hummus and pita bread. And this friend, his parents moved down from London when he was like 5 or 6, and so I remember him starting at the school and it being like, "Ooh, this guy's come from London," like, and you know, the touch of the exotic or whatever, and trying it, like being at his house and his parents bringing in taramasalata, which is like it's cod eggs and lemon juice. I don't know. Like, it just felt so outside of my experience, and yeah, I don't know that my mum have ever got to try taramasalata. And yeah, there was something, I felt like they were like, their snack game was a decade ahead of the other people in the village that I grew up in. And even, you know, I could list hundreds of foods that I've since tried that I first tried in that setting, playing like Mario Tennis or Perfect Dark with fun coloured N64 controllers, not just the stock red and grey. I'm pretty sure there was a yellow one, which was deluxe. So yeah, excited to hear what ones Nath's come up with. I'm pretty sure it's at some point going to involve something gross like chicken Kiev, mini chicken Kievs on pizza.
Hey, cod eggs with lemon juice. What a great question. And a great way to start season 3. I was immediately reminded of the time I dipped the game disc for Worms World Party in lime tea, and then when I took a bite, I was immediately transported back to a time I got hit with a super banana bomb. And also my mouth was all bloody and getting stung by the citrusy lime tea. Okay, that's stupid, sorry. Thanks for all those lovely answers, buddy, which, more than anything else, helped to build this continually growing picture of your childhood, which is lovely, and a nice side part of the podcast. And also a big thanks to Sam for this question, which feels both sort of in keeping with the pod, but also maybe not the kind of question you or I have asked so far or would have thought about. So I think having these listener questions at the beginning of each season is helping to keep things fresh. So that's great. I did also hugely appreciate Sam's explanation of what Proustian memories are, and especially the reference to the movie Ratatouille. That really helped pull things into focus. I think probably initially I got a bit too fixated on Sam's examples. I kept trying to search for sort of tastes and smells really specifically that reminded me of my childhood maybe and video games from them. And I couldn't seem to access any in that sort of way that you and he both managed to and describe so clearly and vividly. One of the things I definitely felt like I was missing out on that you both mentioned was having friends who had like amazing or exotic snacks when we were kids. Not that there weren't, really nice snacks floating around, but I don't remember there being anything that I wasn't allowed to have at home. And it made me think that maybe, whereas your auntie's house was the one for you that had kind of more indulgent food than you got to have at home, maybe my house was the one that had indulgent and kind of like heavy sweet food amongst the people that we knew and my friends and stuff like that. So anyway, initially I was kind of drawing a bit of a blank, but then luckily in the gap between seasons, you and I had a big fun day out in London. We had some risky off-pod chat about this question, and you really helpfully suggested that I reframe my answers around locations a bit more. And with that, I was really off to the races. So I've come up with 3 different types of Proustian memory. The first is triggered by seasonal changes, the second by smells, and the third is food and drink. So the first one, I think is my most unusual one, but I think it's also the most vivid, and it's the one that comes closest to transporting me back to a particular place and time, in the same way that Sam described when talking about, like memories being triggered by sensory stimulus in an involuntary sort of way. So the trigger really is this time of year. It's autumn in the early evenings when the clocks have changed and it's getting darker earlier, and things are maybe just a bit damp and dreary. But we're not into full winter yet. We're not into like cozy fire on, jumpers on mode. And there's this general feeling I think I'm getting at. It's quite hard to describe, but I think most people would be familiar with it. Really dreary is probably the closest word I can get to without going and, using a thesaurus. But the Proustian trigger, I guess, is sort of walking around certain, I guess, very urban bits of Swindon that are quite grey and dreary. And the visuals and smells and maybe sort of feeling a bit cold and a bit sort of flat. That's where I would say the trigger is. So when I was like a school-aged teenager, me and a few friends discovered an internet cafe attached to a corner shop on a quiet street. I guess it's about 5 minutes outside of Swindon's town centre. So the shop was called, I think it still is called Hollywood Nights. And it had been a video rental store for years before. And I knew that because as a side hustle, my dad used to deliver videos for them around Swindon. I think it was one evening a week, which that seems like an insane glimpse into the past, doesn't it? That people would call up and choose a video and then someone would drive around all the houses in Swindon. Not all of the houses, some houses and flats and stuff in Swindon and give them a VHS, which I guess then, and maybe return them as well. But that's crazy. But anyway, he did that, and sometimes he would take me with him. And at some point, I guess in the years from then until when I found it again, the owners, who were these 2 middle-aged men, I think they were called Pete and Ralph. They were both, I don't know what their relationship to one another was, probably just, business partners, but they were a bit rough around the edges. Both used to smoke a lot. Both, he'd never see them eating, both quite slim and, maybe had, sort of the hard life about them, look on them, but very lovely. Just not the kind of people you would ever expect to own a internet cafe. But so they must have closed the video rental part of the business, and then they filled that space with about 12 computers, and 8 of those computers had video games installed on them. And I think it was, I'm going to say, about £2 an hour. You could sit in and play games and, well, have the time of your life, basically, really. I think the first time I visited was with 2 of my oldest friends, Tom and Luke. We used to hang around lots together when we were about 14, I guess, to 16. That period of time before people get cars and you're all driving around together in the evenings. But you have got a bit more independence. You might be out in the evening, on your own, sort of roaming about. I think a lot of the time it kind of just manifested in being around, being outside for hours, walking around, visiting shopping centres, sitting in McDonald's, Subway, stuff like that. So generally just being a bit aimless, hanging about. We found this place. I remember on the first visit, we sat in and we played the original Counter-Strike over network. So just the 3 of us taking it in turns to go 2 against 1. It was the first time I had played a game like that, I think. I remember really falling in love with it, getting excited about the very idea of it. And there were only a handful of other games those PCs could run. They weren't good PCs. They were knackered a lot of the time and used to crash and have all sorts of issues. But one of the other games that was on there was Diablo 2. And the rest were all Valve mods, really, using that original Half-Life engine. So there was Day of Defeat, which was a World War II shooter. Natural Selection, which was like Space Marines versus Aliens. And there was one which I think was called Opera, or The Opera. It was like a bit Matrixy, so like dual pistols and little machine guns, and you could dive, I think. I think the idea was to sort of make it a bit filmic. But I've looked it up, I can't find it anywhere, so I might have another look for that and see if I can feed something into the research notes. And also they had Team Fortress Classic, which is famously the predecessor to TF2, which is, a fantastic game we've mentioned a few times. But the issue was really that you could only really go once a week to this internet cafe because, it was relatively expensive. We were school-age kids, so we had school and other things. I think that's kind of what made it really tantalizing. The fact we only got to go and play these games in 1 or 2 hour chunks once a week if we were lucky. And some of my other friends started to join us as well, like Jack and Justin would come along. We would go in different combinations, of whoever was available, sometimes on the weekends, but very often, really, I think, in these early evening times, when it was a bit dreary. I guess we weren't going to be doing anything else like playing football or anything like that. So it was dreary and dark and kind of a bit grey outside. And I really remember the walks very vividly. It was about 15 minutes from my house, not a nice walk, very like concrete jungly, a bit grim, lots of grubby looking buildings. But I also remember feeling so excited to go and play the games and kind of make the most of it and what we were going to do, that sometimes I almost felt nauseous on the walk. Like I was so excited, it got to my stomach. Anyway, even now, that kind of dreary grey day and walking around central Swindon, that kind of reminds me, that's the Proustian memory. It transports me to Hollywood nights. It kind of going from dusk to dark while you're playing inside. I can, hear the whir of the computers, and it smelled quite strongly of smoke. As you mentioned in your answers, that's obviously quite a vivid one for triggering memories. I think both the owners smoked. They probably weren't supposed to inside the shop, but I really remember them leaning over and being like, "You lads don't mind if we have a ciggy, do you?" while they were pottering around in there. And in terms of the game I think of most, it is that first Counter-Strike, specifically just a handful of some of the maps and just a few of us playing on them. So Militia was one, Assault, Rats, 747. There was this sort of underground car park one. None of them are more of the famous maps you would see on Counter-Strike now. I don't think any of them have really carried through to the later iterations of the game, but I can picture them all very clearly. So I have mentioned in other stories visiting internet cafes in subsequent years, and all of the others were like proper gaming cafes with big comfy chairs and chunky keyboards and, flashing neon lights everywhere. Places built with powerful machines that you wouldn't have in your home. Whereas Hollywood Nights was more like that kind of early internet cafe. It was the kind that it was more like an office space, really, with a few computers in, where people would visit it because they didn't have the internet in their own homes, or they wanted to chat online with their family in other countries because international phone charges were still really high. And it just so happened a few of the machines had games on them. And it was a really particular place for me. We spent a lot of time there in our formative years. I've done some classic banging on there, but it did it felt like a pivotal gaming memory I've been looking to share at some point. So my second Proustian memory, is also the smell of smoke, as you mentioned in your first memory, but more specifically the kind of thick, pungent smell of reefer smoke. So this is a bit like when you mentioned, like from your mum's friend's house, where the smoky smell was very much an indoors one. So I'm not thinking of those times when you're walking through a park somewhere and you catch a whiff and you think, oh, hello, someone's having a party. Or the kind I imagine people sometimes smell at concerts and festivals. It's the more sort of concentrated kind that comes from sort of sustained and, I guess, varied smoking in this instance, in a singular room, and the kind that clings to every ounce of furniture and clothing and stuff in there. It's very rare in my old age now that I experience that smell, one that sort of hung around a lot in my university days, as I'm sure you'll also remember. So it could really trigger a whole heap of different gaming memories. But there are two in particular that always leap out above the rest, both from games I played a lot in my third year of university, sat in my room at the end of the upstairs of my uni house, pretty well engulfed in a hazy fog of whose making I will not say. So the first game is Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth 2, which was a fantastic Command & Conquer style real-time strategy game where you could play as a bunch of good and bad factions from Lord of the Rings. I think it was basically men, elves, dwarves, orcs, like Uruk-hai, like Saruman's orcs, or goblins. And the factions had loads of different unique units. They were balanced quite well in some ways. And I used to play it with my housemates. You could do up to 4 of you versus 4 AI, which was really surprisingly difficult to find on real-time strategy games then, and probably now as well. But you used to end up having these big, epic, exciting battles, like in Lord of the Rings. And I also played it with Jack and Justin and other friends when they would come to visit at uni. And I have some lovely memories of sitting for hours and really zoning in on that game. The other one from that period of time is Team Fortress 2, which I mentioned earlier, but we also briefly mentioned in the episode on options we might choose in games. And it actually came up because I mentioned always playing the heavy class. And you reminded me that when we used to play in university, I always actually favoured the spy, which is very true. And it was a class I loved to play as. It was really exciting and you could like really turn a game around. And I think I got quite good with it over the years. Though in later years, I did switch to the heavy. I think probably because Jack and Justin were really good medics and it suited playing together a bit more. But anyway, back in those university times, you and me used to sit in my bedroom for hours. I think at a time you'd come around for the evening. One of us playing, one of us sat on the bed, and you'd take it in turns to play mainly as a spy, I guess. And we had some great times. So thank you for that, Rob. And also thanks, drugs. My final Proustian memory was one that you did tease, and it has to do with particular food and also drink that remind me of the many LAN weekends I've had. So I've mentioned LAN weekends a few times on the pod, but they're another very formative part of my gaming history. They started in my mid to late teenage years, where we would take our PCs to someone's house and then play games into the early hours. LAN, for younger listeners, stands for Local Area Network, and before the days of multi-connection broadband routers, it was the only way to play games with one another on PC. You would literally just connect to each other and have a local area network. So having said that, we called them LANs, or we still call them LANs, but probably only the first few were actually on local area. Most of them, having been, in the internet age, were, all online, and we just had long sort of wires trailing all over the house and plugged into a modem. So the formula for a LAN weekend, pretty simple. You might arrive on the Friday, you play games for hours and hours and hours, you slowly get drunk and you eat loads of junk food until someone crashes and you all go to bed. Then you get up as early as the hangover allows, usually wake up to find your friends already playing games, or you sort of just, stumble in and sit down again. You just do it all over again for the full Saturday until you feel ill. And it's genuinely the source of many of my best gaming memories, some of my fondest times as a young and also as an older man. When we were younger, I mainly did this with Jack and Justin, who obviously get mentioned a lot. And then in adult life, when Jack was a bit more transient and couldn't always get his PC back to Swindon, it was more likely to be me and Justin. And those ones became sort of almost ritualistic. They were a very valued escape from work and family life. So we used to build up to them for weeks in advance. And the kind of food we ate was often the same. The setup of the day was often the same. So the food that reminds me most of LAN weekends is Kiev in a bun. So it was originally like creamy garlic or garlic butter chicken Kiev. And then in more recent years, I've moved to the M&S Foods plant-based one. So you get a Kiev, you whack it in the oven, and then you sometimes melt a bit of cheese on it, and you get a big fluffy bun. You squeeze the garlic out into the bun, maybe butter it as well, depending on how you're feeling. And it makes this delicious, stodgy snack that perfectly soaks up the booze. And it's also an absolute roll of the dice whether or not you horribly burn yourself with a jet of molten garlic butter. So it does add a little bit of jeopardy as well, which is a big fun part of the experience. Kiev in buns especially remind me of these sort of big, long sessions we would have on strategy games where you really get deep into them. Obviously, you can't be stopping to take big bites out of a bun during a fast-paced FPS or Rocket League or whatever. So things like Civilization especially are part of that Proustian trigger for that particular snack. So along with that, we would have lots of beer, obviously. There have been many, many different types of beers drunk at LAN weekends. Obviously, when we were teenagers, it was whatever was cheapest. Then in those sort of middle years, it was whatever was on offer. And then in the later years, whatever wanky IPA we were all getting into at the time. But the one that reminds me most of LAN weekends, which I still see around occasionally, is Foster's Gold. And that was a staple for many years. Often we would get one beer And then Foster's Gold is like the second one, a crate of Foster's Gold on the side, like dinner and pudding. When I drink that, I think of playing hours of Counter-Strike and Rocket League late into the night, and when the booze had completely numbed my reflexes and I was having to close one eye because of an oncoming migraine. So that final memory leads me into a counter question, or sort of addendum question to Sam's, that I considered. Because at those LANs, often when we got too drunk to play the sort of harder, more strategic games, or online games where the opponents would be too good, we would switch to a game called Chivalry, which was a first-person medieval combat simulator where you just get big, huge swords and spears and maces and stuff and batter each other. And you can be nearly on the floor drunk and still just click like crazy and swing the mouse around and manage to lop someone's head off. So now, when I play Chivalry sober, it kind of makes me feel a bit drunk, or kind of reminds me of those drunken sessions. So I wondered if you had any reverse Proustian memories where playing a particular game, or maybe replaying a game, evokes memories of something that happened in real life. Okay, that's a really long one from me, buddy, but hopefully that can be seen as a testament to this top-tier question. Thanks very much, and thanks again to Sam. Hit me up.
Hey, Hollywood Night. I got to say, you painted a lovely picture of cold, dreary Swindon. Now how at this time of year you're sort of transported back to the rush of discovering Hollywood Nights. I love the contrast in that name between Hollywood Nights, a night on the town, starlight, success, glory, and you thinking about it being like a rundown internet cafe. It's a lovely juxtaposition. But yeah, when I think of Swindon, if I see Swindon on my calendar, I get excited because that means that I'm heading over your way. And my daughter's the same. She bloody loves you guys. And it's like the highlight of our month when we get to come to Swindon. So I think we have like an atypical response to the word Swindon. I think most people are either quite sort of smug and dismissive of it, or do what you do, which is that it's your hometown, so you slag it off, but in a way that only you can slag off your hometown. But yeah, I've got nothing but good things to say about it. Also because I've only really been to all the nice bits of like Old Town, and then we go to the farmers markets or whatever boring middle-aged people do. But I have once had to get the train back, or arrived and had to walk through Saturday night Swindon, like the main night on the town bit, and that was a different experience, I will say. But that's true of anywhere, isn't it? Don't go out on a Saturday night, stay in, lock the doors, play some computer games. This we know. The thing that you were talking about there as well, of like they're having this lovely discovery, this sort of secret of like the untold wonders of internet gaming, and only having access to it like once a week. You must have been thinking about it all of the time. And I bet it's one of those things that if you actually clocked up the hours that you spent in there over the time, it wouldn't actually account to that much in the grand scheme of things. But it must live so strong in your memory because of the point in your life when all of that was happening. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if you spent less than 100 hours in that store, right? And you think about all the other stupid places that you spent 100 hours since, soft plays and God knows, that are just instantly scrubbed from the memory as soon as you can. But Hollywood Nights shines on forever, one hopes. I also have very fond memories of the smoke-filled rooms that you were speaking about. And yeah, taking turns playing Team Fortress 2. My fondest memory of that was we usually played just this one map, which I think was based on a Halo map. So it was a base at either end, and there were these ridges going up the side, which then crossed over like a bridge, which was just pure death. There was no point crossing over the bridge because you could be shot at from everywhere. But yeah, sort of two, it was like symmetrical map, so you could go up either side or try and dart across. And so it was an absolute bloodbath, really difficult to get anywhere. Because there was these ridges up the side, you'd get all these like snipers that would try and get those points. So they'd often be like 2 or 3 snipers up on the ridge. And really enjoyed, like, one of my favourite things ever was tried doing it for ages and finally got it, was like being the spy, pretending to be the sniper. So for anyone that hasn't played Team Fortress, the sniper is like a sniper, and the spy has, you've got these little hotkeys that let you select a mask, and it means that you look exactly like the other team. you got one-shot kills with your pistol, but it's like it's a magnum thing, so it's quite hard to do. And then this lovely little stabbing blade, which if you manage to get someone in the back, it's instant kills, but if you're trying to slash someone in the front, it's useless. And so it was all about trying to sort of creep up on people, stab them, change your disguise again, run away, and like re-establish yourself as someone else. So going up the ridge, I like disguised myself as a sniper, and I was trying to like mimic the mouse action of like as though I was taking shots, and it was so clearly, I guess the end didn't light up properly, and I think if anyone looked at me, they wouldn't have been like, oh, there's a guy just shooting. It must have looked laughably wrong, but in my head it was like the perfect disguise. I think I finally did manage to get a kill that way, but really what probably happened was that no one saw me. They just didn't see me. They were just busy sniping, and I killed them. But yeah, I think of that, like the delight and giddiness of doing that. I definitely get the giggles coming up with an idea and not being able to articulate it, and then it getting lost in my own mind with it. I had all of those associations with that. And with your final answer, obviously, I've never been invited to a LAN weekend because I don't have a gaming PC. But I have strong memories of you showing me a countdown clock for a LAN weekend that you and Justin had. And it was like, I think you called it the Angela Lansbury weekend, and it had a picture of Angela Lansbury, but obviously with all caps on the LAN part of it. Yeah, my equivalent of those is I play FIFA online with my friend Nick. We do like a season mode against the computer. We've been doing it since lockdown using SharePlay. But pre-lockdown, we used to do it, 4 of us against the computer, doing like a season mode. So it was crazy because your players were like always out of position. You had a massive advantage when you had the ball because the computer couldn't respond to your totally unpredictable behaviour. But we shipped in goals all of the time because our defenders were like sprinting off the sides of the screen because it doesn't like track as you move up and down. A game that wasn't really designed for it, but we were sort of forcing it to do it. We'd have these evenings where we'd like either play like a World Cup or maybe play through like a season mode thing, and there'd be like punishments for making mistakes. He's just drinking like way too much, doing shots, like punishment shots, and then obviously that just meant you got worse and worse at the game. Whereas now, me and Nick, you know, we sat drinking tonic waters and grinding out 1-0 wins against Stoke. It's a different ball game, but that was my equivalent, I guess, of like dedicating time, having like ritualistic time spent dedicated to computer games beyond the years of teenage sleepovers. And I think of those fondly, although we never had a countdown clock, not that I remember. I haven't really done a research section because, you know, beyond trying to look up if Hollywood Nights was still open in Swindon, which it didn't look like it was. So instead I'll skip on to your counter question, which was your reversed Proust question. And I guess it's one of those things that's, with computer games, often you play them at a point in time, and so events remind you of that point in time. But other than you playing Grand Theft Auto on loop...
Grand Theft Auto. Better luck next time.
Often you don't go back and play old games outside of, you know, visiting an arcade or whatever. An answer that I thought of was playing Overcooked. So this isn't going back into the distant past, but recently I played a bit of Overcooked 2, and we played that this time last year, maybe a bit longer ago. We played a bunch of Overcooked 2 over the internet together, but it reminded me of playing the original Overcooked with like my daughter when she was maybe 3, and just playing the tutorial level where all you have to do is chop onions and then cook the onions, and that makes onion soup, and then you deliver them. There's no clock until you've made the first 3 meals or something. But what it meant is that we just had time to dick about in that level. It sort of, you know, she was able to pick things up and chop things or whatever. But mostly, you know, 'cause she was 3, maybe 4, she just wanted to like lark about. She didn't want me to like make the meals. She loved it when the thing sat on fire. She worked out how to pick up the extinguisher and like spin in circles. And so we used it as a weird like role-playing game. My favourite memory was trying to work out what the limit was on how many onions you could take out of the cupboards where you can take the ingredients out. and there's one cupboard per ingredient, and on this first level it was just onions, and I just tried to like fill the screen with onions and then ran through it, sprinting through it and spreading the onions everywhere. And I was like, this is what play is. This is how things are supposed to be done. So any time that I play Overcooked and any future iteration of an Overcooked game, I think it will take me back to that place, sat in the old layout of my living room with a young daughter, laughing and feeling totally connected to my inner child.
Since my last message, a few more memories from Hollywood Nights have emerged, so I'll just list them off in no particular order. So there was another group of kids from our school that used to go there as well, and we would occasionally play against them on Counter-Strike, and we built up a bit of a rivalry with them. And it turned out, for some reason, the owners liked them a lot more than us, and they dubbed them the Hollywood Knights, with a K, like Knights of the Round Table, just like a sort of cool clan name or something that they all used to put in their Counter-Strike screen names. And then sadly, when one of the owners, I think it was Pete, when he died, the Hollywood Knights all got invited to his funeral. And we don't think we were even told it had happened. So they were much more in favour for some reason. We never really found out why. There was also a local guy there who used to go along and help the owners maintain the PCs, I guess because they just had no idea about them or like what to do when a game crashed and things like that. His name was Tom, and he was probably in his early to mid-20s. I remember he used to sit in the corner a lot. He was always online or playing the games, and he was always drinking from a carton of milk, which I guess maybe he got it free from the newsagent's part of the shop as like a, payment for fixing the computers. But when a game crashed, one of the owners would say, "Go ask Big Tom, he'll help you." And so as a group of kids, we used to, go, "Hey, Big Tom, Counter-Strike's crashed," or whatever. And then at some stage, I remember him sort of going, "Stop calling me that." And it turned out he didn't like being called Big Tom. The owners were just being mean because he was like a heavy guy, and I suppose he was a bit nerdy and stuff. He wasn't fond of it at all. And at some stage, maybe because they were mean to him, Tom stopped helping out with the PCs, and they did used to break all the time. And I have a very vivid memory of going in one day, and Pete had opened up one of the computers, and he was tinkering around inside with the RAM and the graphics card and stuff. And bearing in mind he was a man in his late 50s, I think, who I don't think he had any idea what was going on inside a computer. It was very bold of him to think that he could fix one by messing around with the internal components. And I'm pretty sure he had a ciggy on the go, and he was also in his vest, like he was a mechanic, and he'd taken off his shirt to stop it from getting computer oil on it or something like that. So finally, your research notes were correct that it has closed down now, definitely. The Internet Cafe bit has been turned into flats, but the newsagents bit is still there. It's just not called Hollywood Nights anymore. It's an off license. What I'm going to do is add a link in the show notes to the Google Street View of that bit of Swindon, so people can see where it was, and the listeners can, click around the streets and imagine themselves as young Nathan marching through Swindon on a blustery day, full of excitement and wonder at the games that he's going to play.
Memory complete. Uploading memory.
Thanks for listening to The Memory Game. If you would like to share a gaming memory with us, ask us a question or send us your thoughts, you can contact us at memorygamepod@gmail.com or on Instagram at memorygamepod.